Russia investigation started. My next guest tweeted, timing of this story is interesting, coming 4 days after Trump's dossier tweets, which also impugned the FBI. The FBI largely treated the Trump campaign and subsequently the Trump presidency with kid gloves. But this may indicate the gloves are coming off. Joining me now is Ned Price, former special assistant to President Obama and MSNBC national security analyst. Ned, thank you for your time this morning as we talk about that and the kid gloves. The president doesn't feel like he's been treated kindly by the FBI. So what would this have looked like if he didn't get kid gloves?
Well, Francis, let me just remind you that for much of 2016, the American people were under the distinct impression that the FBI was investigating one of the two major party nominees. We knew all along that an investigation grew out of the Benghazi probe into Hillary Clinton. Director Comey, in July of 2016, then famously went out and detailed the case the FBI had laid out, ultimately exonerating her, but doing quite a bit of political damage in the process. But then just a few months later, in October, sending a public letter, a letter that was made public, I should say, essentially saying that the case had been reopened. So all of that time, we knew that there was this ongoing investigation into the Clinton matter. What we did not know until earlier this year, 2017, was that the FBI also had an investigation into the Trump campaign. We learned that only early this year when that same Director Comey went before Congress. That very clear. We did not know that before the election. It did not leak. But as I think you remember, Francis, there were leaks aplenty when it came to the Clinton probe, something that continually haunted the Clinton campaign. And so when I say the FBI has treated the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency so far with kid gloves, I mean that they have been deferential and in many cases duly so. But with this report, that could suggest this is starting to change.
Yeah, and with that, the FBI has been taking these hits from the president. No secret, we've heard about it in the tweets and those attacks and the GOP in an apparent effort to discredit the Russia investigation. So how likely is it that a federal agent would want to fire back?
Well, it's not all that unlikely. Look, you know, leaks can never be condoned, but at the same time, there's also some human nature involved in this. When the president is continually lambasting your institution, your department, your agency, there's going to be the inclination to punch back, and especially when against a president whose mantra is when they hit you, you hit back 10 times harder. So I'm not sure where this report came from. The New York Times, as I recall, details that four sources, both current and former, and both American and foreign, provided input into this report. I don't know for certain that it came from the FBI, but the timing to me certainly is interesting. It did come about 4 days after the president alleged that the dossier, falsely alleged, I should say, that the dossier spawned this investigation when we now know otherwise. This, to me, certainly looks like it could be the FBI trying to correct the record here.
Well, interesting also when it comes to the role of George Papadopoulos here. What's your sense about this when you're reading this? And I'm curious to see if you're surprised by this and stemming back from not the dossier, but from you know, a night out of drinking here. And his acts here, do they strike you more as Machiavellian or somebody who really is just an opportunist?
Well, look, you know, the Trump camp has portray George Papadopoulos as nothing more than a coffee boy. But what we know about George Papadopoulos, what we have learned, I should say, is that he was one of a small number of foreign policy advisors on what was a rather small foreign policy advisory team that the Trump campaign had put together. He was seated at the table with Jeff Sessions, who headed the Trump's foreign policy and national security advisory team. He provided input into all sorts of decisions. He claims to have been key in arranging a meeting between then-candidate Trump and the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So he seems to play a role that is certainly outsized and not what one would expect of a coffee boy. But what's also interesting to me is the fact that one night drinking, he spills the beans about this Russian operation to an Australian diplomat. I think it is very difficult to believe that he also did not share these same details with others in the Trump campaign. And if he did, it raises the question as to why these campaign officials did not approach the FBI. We know they did not approach the FBI. Instead, we know that a foreign government actually did what these Americans should have done in alerting the FBI to what George Papadopoulos had said.
I'll be curious to see if it went up the chain, if at all. Ned Price,